Hello everybody, my name is DoomFish. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you everything there is to know about this block right here, which of course is the observer. So it's a very complicated block, as some people would tell you. I mean, a lot of people don't exactly know what this thing does. All they know is that, well, it observes things. And I'm here to tell you that it really isn't that complicated. The functions of the observer are actually very, very simple, and I'll get into those right away. So, as always with episodes of the Redstone Toolbox, I'm going to be showing you how to make this observer, and all it takes is 3 cobblestone on the bottom, 3 on the top, a nether quartz on the right side, and then 2 redstone dusts in these spots right here, and you will get your observer. So, there are 2 different sides of the observer that are worth talking about. There is the face of the observer, and it sort of looks like almost like a face. You got the eyes, the mouth there. So we call it the face, and this is what actually detects the changes. So anything that is on this block right here, directly in front of the face of the observer, that's what will, if it changes, it'll send an output through the back side of the observer, or just the back, or the back end, or whatever you want to call it, or the output. So this will give off a pulse if a change happens. So for example, let's put some dust here, a lamp here, and we can put dust here, and we'll see that since we put a block down, it actually tricked this observer into firing. So it'll fire off a short pulse, so that is, you can see the pulse is actually very short. It looks a little bit longer because we are powering a redstone lamp every time this changes. So for example, I can put a button here, and when I turn on the button, then this changes. And when the redstone dust turns off, it also lets out a pulse. So this is one of the many setups that will actually turn on your observer pulse, like you just saw, and it's sort of complicated or sort of not clear what actually does this. And at least in the Java edition of the game, the observer is turned on using block states. So anytime the block state of this block in front of the observer changes, then it'll send out an output. So the easiest way to look at the block states of items is to hit the F3 button and look at the debug menu. And if you take a look at the right side of the screen, right under where it says targeted block and then the coordinates, you'll get some information. So you'll get some of for redstone dust, you do have a lot of information here. The east, north, south, and west sort of tells like which direction this redstone dust is pointing. So this can be changed if we put some dust here. We can see that now instead of having east and, or excuse me, let's look at this. Instead of having north and south being labeled as sides, we put it here. This is labeled as north and west having sides. And also, the easy thing is if this is powered, we can see that the power goes from 0 on the block state to 15. So anytime any of those numbers on the right side of the debug menu change, then this observer will go off. Here's another setup with just the button instead of the redstone dust, and again, looking on the right side, pay attention to where it says powered false. When we turn it on, it's powered true, and then it'll go to powered false again. Now, the observer brings off a short pulse again when it's turned on, so when it changes, and then when it changes back. And that's really what's powerful about observers is they measure this sort of change in a block. So I guess if you had a definition of what this thing did, it sends out a short pulse every time the block state of the block in front of it changes. Now, for example, we've got a trapdoor here and a note block here. So with the trapdoor, again, we have a lot of information on the right side about direction. We've got some on whether it's powered, whether it's open, whether it's waterlogged, and we're going to pay attention to whether it's open or not. So we can flick it, and it becomes open is true, which again, as you just saw, brings off a pulse to the redstone lamp behind it. Flick it down, and then our open turns to false, and the same thing happens. So every time this is flicked, we get a pulse here. Now again, this can sort of happen with our note block over here in a similar way, that if you pay attention to where it says note colon 0, you right click it, note becomes 1. So again, this is everything on the right is the information about the block state, which is what the observer actually measures. So something else we can do with these note blocks is that it's very interesting because we can actually change the block underneath this, and since the instrument is set to bass drum right now, and if you remember something about note blocks, they actually change instruments based on what block is underneath them. We can break this block underneath and we'll actually get a update out of here because the instrument is now a harp. So because the block under this changes the block state of the note block here, it actually does send a short pulse through this observer right here. And if we change it to a bass drum again, or we can maybe set this underneath it, now it's a bass, excuse me, it will again send a short pulse out. So all those things can change, and those are just a couple of examples. Something to keep in mind is that there are literally over 100 different blocks that have different block states. So just showcasing some of the wide variety of different things that can trigger observers, we have some saplings. So again, if we hit F3, what's important to change here is the growth stage on the right, or just it says stage. Since I just put this down, it is stage 0, and the saplings will actually go through, I believe, a couple of invisible growth stages when they get closer and closer to becoming a full tree. So it can be like at growth stages like 1 and 2, I think, and still be a sapling, and so no visible change actually happens, but every time that happens, it will actually give out an output to our redstone lamp here, from our observer, of course. And the same thing with these droppers. We have the triggered state, so triggered is now set to false, and we can see that even though some things are very interesting, and this sort of exemplifies that, is that even though it says triggered false, and we power it and we can clearly hear something coming out, we're actually not getting a output here. Like I can try and look fast enough, nothing's happening. And that is because some blocks actually don't really have this. Most of them are triggered by the block state, but some of them actually are not, and this is one of them. But we can hear pretty easily that the dropper changes because we can hear the sound that comes out of it. We hear the sort of clicking noise, and that sort of signifies a change as well. Now, some other things like this powered rail here. If we place the powered rail on top, we can see that this light lights up. That's pretty obvious because the rail down here changes to being a slant, and we can see, I believe it's the shape ascending east tag over there on the right. That sort of makes that happen. Now, a much lesser known thing here is that these leaves, they have a distance tag on them. So distance is now set to 7, and we can place down some acacia logs or any log, and the distance actually changes based on how close it is. So 7 is the max. It'll go, since this is 1 block away from the wood, it'll be 1, this one's 2, 3, 4, and you can pay attention over at that lamp right there. It's kind of difficult to see, but we do in fact get an output every time we change this distance tag here. Now also, we can do the same thing with basically any block where we can change the shape of it. This is a normal stair, right? But if we place a block right here, right here, we can see that we get an output here because the stair is now a different shape. So now it's the shape inner right instead of the shape straight like it was before. So I'm going to go back to our dropper example here, and like I said, there are a couple exceptions, like this one doesn't actually have a block state change. Just the fact that it gets powered will actually change this. And there are a couple exceptions like this, but I'm not going to list out all of them. I believe you can find them in the wiki page for the observer. I will link that in the description for the official Minecraft wiki. But basically what that means is that you will have to do some trial and error to make sure the situation that you want to observe can actually be observed, because like this one doesn't have a block state. Some of them that you think would be observed actually can't change, and that is usually a little discrepancy between the Bedrock and the Java editions of Minecraft. So everything in this tutorial pertains, again, to the Java edition. So a very common use of these observers is to make an observer clock by facing one into the other. So essentially, if we hit F3, you can see on the right side the powered tag is looking very much between true and false, because this thing sort of gives off a pulse, it stops, and then this observer on the other side notices that it gives off a pulse, and it does as well, and then it just keeps on going back and forth, and they keep on just observing each other, and we can see we get this quick pulse out of here, and this is a very compact, easy way to make a timing circuit in Minecraft. So something else that is very interesting is that you don't necessarily need a block state to change the observer. If you move the observer, even though these two blocks in front of it are the same, they're both air blocks directly in front of it, it will give off a pulse, as you can see. And that is, I think an easy way to explain it is that we can look at this block and the targeted fluid is actually in a different coordinate. So it notices that when the observer gets pushed that, hey, I'm not looking at the same exact block, I'm looking at one that's in a different coordinate. And so it will actually observe that difference. So one of the best examples of what I just talked about and how that can be useful is in our flying machine. So this is a very, very standard flying machine design, and we can trigger it by placing just a block in front of this observer face. So these observers are actually what's powering these pistons, which powers the flying machine. And why they can fire is, again, these observers, they detect a change whenever they get pushed or pulled. So they're detecting a change each time. So this piston will pull this piston, which pulls this observer, which sends a chain that will actually push this. And again, since they're short pulses, your piston will actually spit out its block. Even though these are sticky pistons, they won't retract. So just to show you a better example of that, we can destroy our flying machine here. We can grab an observer facing into a piston, place a block here, and every time we fire this, we'll see that the pulse is short enough where our piston will actually spit out, as it's often called, its block in front of it. So that's pretty much everything about this block right here, the observer. And I know this might be a little confusing because it is not really clear what actually determines whether or not an observer will fire. But an important thing to remember is that an observer will just send an output if it detects a change 90% of the time in the block in front of it. So that change can be something visual, it can be something not visual, like we saw with the saplings, or with the tree and the leaves and the distance tag. But basically, if any of those tags change, or there's any visible change in the block, or auditory change like with the dropper, then you might see a output out of this observer right here. So that is going to do it for today's episode of the Redstone Toolbox. I hope you found it informative, or if you enjoyed the video, don't be afraid to leave a like, and you can subscribe for more content just like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.